imagine that we are all taking a public speaking class, and our professor has asked us to do an informative speech on a socially important topic. It's the day of our speech, and as our introduction, we quote a passage from the Bible on marriage. All of a sudden, our professor demands that we sit down and calls us a fascist bastard. When we receive our grading rubric back, it says, "Ask God what your grade is."
Oh.
Good morning. Today I am going to inform you about speech codes. It is important for college students to understand what speech codes are. Do you know if this college implements speech codes? Speech codes are on the rise in the United States. During this speech, I hope to inform you what speech codes are, arguments for and against speech codes, and current legal action that are in the media. Let's begin by defining what a speech code is. According to legal definitions, Legal Terms Dictionary, speech code refers to a rule or regulation that limits, restricts, or bans speech beyond the strict legal limitations upon freedom of speech or press, usually found in the legal definitions of harassment, slander, libel, and fighting words. The Foundation for Individual Rights in Education has a much simpler definition. It states a speech code is a university's regulation prohibiting expression that would constitutionally be protected in a society at large. How are speech codes implemented? Speech codes are implemented in college universities through policies. There are 9 common policies that are speech codes, categories of policies. Here are 5 examples. On the next slide, I'm going to give very specific examples of speech codes. San Jose University Housing Department has a harassment policy that prohibits publicly telling offensive jokes. I ask, what's offensive? They say that a publicly offensive joke is anything that the listener determines to be offensive to them. The University of Colorado's resident handbook prohibits bias-motivated incident. What is a bias-motivated incident? It's an incident involving racism, sexism, or homophobia that intentionally or unintentionally causes physical or emotional harm. And finally, I use the Grambling State University example. They have an email policy that states the creation or distribution of any disruptive or offensive messages, including offensive comments about race, gender, hair color, disabilities, age, sexual orientation, pornography, religious beliefs and practice, political beliefs, or national origin. What does all this mean? This means that universities in the United States have policies that infringe on your First Amendment rights. Now let's take a look at some numbers. According to the U.S. Department of Education, there are 4,409 degree-granting schools. In a recent study conducted by the Foundation of Individuals in Education, they conducted a study that involved 375 schools. Of the 375 schools, 71% were found to have a speech code that infringed on First Amendment rights. Why does any of this matter? If we apply the same principle to the 4,409, 3,130 schools in the United States have speech codes that impede your First Amendment rights. Now that we discussed what speech codes are and how they are implemented, I would like to discuss arguments for and against speech codes. I will first discuss arguments for speech codes. Many people believe that speech codes foster a productive learning environment by prohibiting speech that would offend other students. And it also said that speech codes emphasize the use of fact and reasoning through critical thinking. They do this. I use an example of a debate. Oftentimes during debate, it can get very emotional, and sometimes people resort to name-calling or slander. It is said that speech codes prevent this because people use reasoning and facts and truth to make their arguments. According to Gerald Ullman, who wrote The Price of Free Speech, Campus Hate Speech Codes, speech codes are morally essential to a just resolution of the conflict between civil rights and liberties. Basically, all this means is that speech codes solve the struggle between the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment. And finally, Many people believe that speech codes protect universities from lawsuits, therefore making classes cheaper and tuition cheaper for students. People who argue against speech codes, foundations of their argument is that it violates First Amendment rights. It does this by prohibiting hate speech. The people who argue against speech codes believe that hate speech is a vital component to a college campus. It is an unpopular opinion that may be offensive, but they believe it has a place in our universities. They also believe that students are afraid to speak up in class. Students who might hold the unpopular opinion may not want to speak up because it goes against the popular opinion of the class. And it encourages a false reality. By not getting the whole story in our college campuses, we are left with one side, and who knows what the other side is. Finally, I want to discuss speech codes in the media. In the University of Nebraska, a student and a political science professor were exchanging emails about classroom discussions. They had very differing opinions, and it kind of got a little carried away, so the professor said, okay, we need to stop this. Well, the student decided to take it one step further and send anonymous emails to the professor, and they criticized the professor and attacked the professor. The professor forwarded these to the police, and the student was not only charged but convicted of disturbing the peace. When this went to the Supreme Court of Nebraska, they overturned this ruling because they said the policies on that campus violated that student's First Amendment right, and he was exonerated of all charges. And finally, do you remember the story I told you in the beginning? This is a true story. It's about a student named Jonathan Lopez. Jonathan was attending Los Angeles Community College, and his instructor did call him a fascist bastard and threatened him with expulsion. His instructor also wrote, "Ask God what your grade is." Jonathan sued the school, and the 9th District Court of California found that Los Angeles Community College violated Jonathan's First Amendment rights. In conclusion today, we discussed what speech codes are, how they are implemented, and I've shown you examples of universities' policies. We've also discussed arguments for speech codes and how they protect and provide a safe learning environment for students. We discussed arguments against speech codes and how it violates your First Amendment rights. I showed you 2 examples of current legal action in the media. And finally, I would like to leave you with this thought. Freedom of speech is what gives our voice its character. It is up to all of us to decide if we are willing to silence a part of who we are to pacify others, or if being heard and hearing all makes us more understanding and balanced. Thank you.